morning, Gymnasium. Welcome to another week, another assembly. Hope you've had a good week so far. Starting to fly by now. We'll soon be getting close to Easter on the 17th of April. So what I want to talk to you about for the assembly this week is, as we're all at home and we're having a lot of screen time, so those good old-fashioned things made from paper back to Gutenberg's first press, and beyond that, books. And I'd like to talk to you in this assembly about some of the books that inspired me at school. And I'd like to perhaps get you thinking about books that you could read, you're not reading, or the ones, and they don't have to be necessarily on paper. People can use a Kindle or similar device. So anyway, I saw this cartoon this week, and it did make me wonder about the world we're in right now, because the caterpillar is obviously saying, "You've changed," and the butterfly says, "We're supposed to." So many people talking about the new normal. Obviously, I'm in a lot of conversations with colleagues and schools outside of Moldova, in Europe, in the USA, and everybody trying to adjust. And what is the best way that we all adjust? Well, as we know, one of the best ways we all adjust is that we keep some routines going, that we make sense of our normality as we go forward. So the changes can sometimes be good. I would say that although the Student Council tell me they all want to come back to school, and I desperately want everybody to come back to school, and we can get these corridors again full of good noises. It's very quiet here at the moment, as you can imagine. I'm sitting in my office. At the same time, there are some really good ways of learning that are coming from this. And I also read a really good article this week about how a lot of families are having their meals together for the first time. They're talking to one another, and these are all positives we need to focus on. Okay, before we start, a little quiz. You might not know this, but at my last school, I used to love World Book Day in March, and I used to love being able to put a costume on from one of my favourite characters. So, as an interesting starter, can I ask anyone in the audience there, who does that character portray right now? Okay, I'm going to go for hands up. See, this interaction in not real time isn't working. I'm going to go for Valentin, and Valentin, of course, it would shout back at me, Sherlock Holmes. Okay, the great Sherlock Holmes, one of the greatest sort of detective series in the world, and I did enjoy playing Sherlock Holmes. Okay, bit more difficult this time. Nobody? Jacob's hand would be up, of course. Delia, Leandro, looking around the room. Igor, of course, would spot this, because Igor would be definitely one of these characters. This is from the Three Musketeers, Alexandre Dumas' Three Musketeers, and of course, well, you might pick for Porthos or Athos. I was going for my hero D'Artagnan. I think as I get older, I probably am more Athos than D'Artagnan in my mind. Even D'Artagnan got old in the end. Okay, more tricky this time, although the book might give it away if you can see it properly. Oh, come on, everybody interested in Russian culture and literature should have their hands up right now. Well, it was my attempt to play Leo Tolstoy. I think I did a good job there. Costume was given when I was in Tomsk in Siberia. So there's me, Leo Tolstoy, reading War and Peace. Okay. Anyone who loves Romanian literature and poetry should have their hand up by now. Yes, it is Captain Dan in the statue of Alexandru Vasily outside the National Library there. So I'm playing the heroic Captain Dan in my portrayal. I was really lucky at school. I had good teachers who knew the value of reading. I think it was the novelist C.S. Lewis who once said, "We read to know that we're not alone." And I think with books we find all sorts of ideas, experiences. I've even read somewhere online that there's a class, I think it might even be in Holland, they're reading Anne Frank's diary. They're trying to empathize of what living in claustrophobic, confined conditions. I don't think for one second that Anne Frank's experience is anywhere near the same as a lockdown for hopefully just a few more weeks. But at the same time, it actually makes people think, and that empathy, and I think books give us empathy often. I always like the idea that books allow you to take your knowledge and learning on by yourselves. And if the purpose of education, and you look at things like sort of Bloom's taxonomy, which is a posh way of sort of saying how learning is more sophisticated, the more knowledge you acquire and more wisdom and understanding. Well, books allow us to kind of sit alone and those ideas then flow, or that we look at different people's experiences, and the famous words of Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird, to walk in somebody else's shoes for that empathetic experience. The first book I was ever given by a teacher is this one, because I always loved history. I came from a part of the world which was very historical. So I come from the border counties of England and Wales, a beautiful county called Shropshire. And we have history going back to the Celtic peoples, the Romans, the Vikings, the Saxons. The Industrial Revolution started there in Ironbridge. And I always loved history, and the history teacher that I had at primary school recognised this. And so he gave me something which was a different challenge. So the very first book that I remember being given, I think must have been about 8, to actually go home and read, was this Penguin book on the Crimean War, which was a war between Britain, France and Turkey against Russia over the Crimea in 1854, 1856. And so this fascinated me to find out something which was out of the norm of my sort of studying of history. And then I was given this book, R.J. Unstead, a very famous children's historian, and he wrote a whole series of books on British history. I'm assuming that's supposed to be Nelson, of Nelson's Column and Trafalgar Square fame. But this story of Britain, so to know your own country's history. History is not a settled place. There's various interpretations of what happens, and history does change. But I think to get a sense of the past and your identity, for me, even as a young child at primary school into secondary school, was really important. And these first books really did fire my imagination. I don't know if it's a boy thing, the idea of heroes, and then as you get older, you get more cynical and realize that heroes don't quite have all the heroic things you imagine they should have as a child. Swallows and Amazons is a wonderful, wonderful series of books. Arthur Ransom set his adventures up in a part of England called the Lake District, full of wonderful hills and sort of lakes. And these were young children on that cusp of growing up, where they weren't quite adults and they weren't small children. They were discovering the world, and they spent their summers on the lakes and having all sorts of adventures. And it really just fired my imagination. I love these books. They were great books to escape into. And I know there was a film made recently on Swallows and Amazons, as most of these things get made into films. There we go. I still love this book. And if you're going to watch the film, I would go for Richard Lester's 1970s classic with Michael York playing D'Artagnan and Oliver Reed as Athos and Richard Chamberlain and Frank Finlay and all sorts. An amazing cast, actually. The Three Musketeers, I don't know if it appealed to me because of the heroism of these people, the swashbuckling, all for one for all. Good motto for cohesion, I imagine. But they were just really, 16th century France, the fight between the Protestant Huguenots and the Catholics, and the machinations of Cardinal Richelieu and the young sort of Louis the 13th into the Louis the 14th. Wonderful, absolute beauty. I still would pick that book up today and read it. In fact, my copy I gave to a student who said he'd never read a book before, and I thought I'd have a challenge. And I gave it to him just before I left YD, and I had this old copy of The Three Musketeers for a long time since my university days. I was given a challenge to try a difficult book. This is a really obscure book now called The Cruel Sea, and not many of you will even have heard of it. Nicholas Montserrat, and it's basically about a warship in World War II in the Royal Navy. Wonderful characters in this book and the interplay, and it was the first time I think I read a book that didn't have a happy ending, which kind of, you always expect there to be a happy ending because there is, but maybe this book reflected some aspects of life I needed to get my head around as an adolescent. Anyway, that was a good pick that was given to me. Now, Alan Sillitoe's Saturday Night and Sunday Morning came from a whole genre of the 1950s and 1960s in Britain called working class kitchen sink dramas. And because my father was a coal miner and I came from a working class family, I was the first in my family to go to university, I should say. I really found a lot of narrative that resonated from some of this literature. The anti-hero aspect of the character in Saturday Night and Sunday Morning, Arthur Seaton. And I remember studying this for my GCSEs as well. It was a very different sort of book, but again, it was about how working class people found their own hopes and aspirations. And if you come from a country that's quite class dominated by like the UK, where even your accent will kind of make a judgment on you from somebody who's different to you, this was a really sort of important book to read. And then the classic for me, there's a theme now in the next couple of books. I love the work of D.H. Lawrence. Now, Lawrence, of course, is famous for writing that book, as the judge said in the 1960 sort of case against Penguin Publishers. Would you allow your servants to read this book? Again, which showing how out of date Britain was. Of course, he wrote Lady Chatterley's Lover. But I like Lawrence for this book in particular, Sons and Lovers, which again resonated to me. I even remember there's the miner's pit boots on the front of the cover with the hearth and the coal backed up, burning there as a sort of nighttime scene. And for me, the relationship between sort of Paul Morell and his mother and his father, and how all that interplayed in the coalfields of Nottinghamshire in England, it was a really, I loved H. Lawrence's work anyway. Also the Rainbow, but it started to branch me out into more sophisticated literature, shall I say. Now, this is a book that was given to me by a teacher of mine who started to see a 14-year-old me probably start to go off the straight and narrow a little bit more, and he gave me this book one break time. And this teacher had actually been the son of a coal miner too, and in fact he'd gone to Magdalen College, Oxford, and won a scholarship, and he was a great mentor to have at school, because inside the book he'd inscribed to Rob, carry the flame and defend the weak. He wanted to remind me that all the talents and gifts that I had as a sort of a young man, I shouldn't be wasting them. I shouldn't be getting into pointless arguments with teachers over daft stuff. I should be using my skills and sort of supporting more. And it always struck me the messages in this. The Road to Wigan Pier is, George Orwell wrote 1984, Animal Farm, which is way more famous about totalitarianism societies. But The Road to Wigan Pier he wrote looking at how awful England was in the 1930s in the north, and some really harrowing stories there. And again, that empathy of people's lives, and how reading can transform you from one situation, from your own comfort zone maybe. There we go, War and Peace. I was given that as a challenge by a wonderful English teacher I had called Eileen Brain, and I think she gave it to me to basically shut me up. It is the classic. I wish I could read Russian to actually read it in Russian, but it is an astonishing work. I mean, it stands up there with anything from sort of Shakespeare and I devoured this, and I know there's been films made of War and Peace, but doesn't compare. And I would love one day, I don't think my Russian will ever be good enough to read. There's the challenge for you, Igor, and Daria, to make me understand and be able to read that in Russian. And then the final one at school, so I've taken myself right up until about the age of 16, was the one I remember the most was Solzhenitsyn. Now, he wrote the Gulag Archipelago, which of course he also got the Nobel Prize for. But for short stories, I mean, everyone talks about The Great Gatsby, but for me, the short story was this, The One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, and an incredible book looking at the life of the gulags and just that harshness and the sort of where the bits of humanity can be found, and also the worst awfulness of what one human being can do to another. It also took me out of my comfort zone as somebody who lived in the UK in a very so-called safe society. I then went on to read the Gulag Archipelago, and I think my love of Russian literature and culture came from reading these types of books. I have to say now that I'm reading Eminescu's poetry, not in Romanian, I have to say, and I'm really enjoying some of that and discovering a whole new genre there as well. Okay, I would like you, I'll put the clip here onto the email, because I've discovered I'm still trying to work out how I embed this, and also it's easy for you to watch in your own time. So it's a wonderful TED talk, how books can open your mind. I recommend you have a read of it. What will you read? What books will you have on your list? Well, there's a good challenge for you when you're at home and you're on school closure and you're on the distance learning plan. I think everybody should have a good book on the go. I love the idea of having a book in your bag, and you can have a book and quietly take yourself off and read, and that independent learning, and those books will live with you and stay with you for life, and you can never read everything. I can tell you that now. So Gymnasium, have a great day. It's almost the weekend, and I look forward to seeing and hearing you. And maybe we could even get a book reading group going, or certainly swap some ideas of books, of what we've read and recommend. And that'd be a nice way to also keep some cohesion between us as a year group as well. Okay, have a wonderful day. Have a lovely weekend when it comes. Diolch yn fawr.